All right, troops, let's go on a jaunt. I'm going to tell you about the Pan spirit today. First, in scripture, Isaiah 34:14 talks about Pan, goats. What seems like fantasy, mythological creatures crying out in the wilderness. Isaiah 13:21 also alludes to this. Not to mention, the dragon is mentioned 4 times, and the unicorn, and Numbers 23:22. The cockatrice is also named, the satyr in the Bible, the he-goat, the hairy one. These are all things from ancient past. And I have seen the ancient past ones versus the modern day recreated ones that mad science labs and the dumbs try to create and bring forth to the surface. Oh my gosh, it's wet. So there is a hierarchy from Baphomet that also goes down the chain of command to Pan's hierarchy and the workers of Pan and what the spirit of Pan actually is. Some other scriptures that detail it is Genesis 27:11-23, Leviticus 4:24, 9:15. There is mention of the kid of the goats, a literal offspring, hybrids, much like Lord of the Rings stuff. Leviticus 4:23, Genesis 37:31, and it also mentions devils with horns, Leviticus 17:7. The demons, a name for that is also Saiyr, Sayer, which goes and ties in with the satire realm. All right, so in the Word of God, the Scriptures, God also promises, the cool thing is that He promises to destroy Babylon's habitation of devils and every unclean bird and all these unclean creatures and whatnot. Revelations 18 also talks about the unclean caged birds, shaking them out of their nests. These are also from constellations as they reside, the kingdom of darkness, primarily in the heavens. Revelations 18:2. Old Babylon was composed of satyrs. So that's some food for thought there. So what are we going to be seeing in the future in Revelations? Old Babylon, composed of satyrs. There's also mention of 2 Chronicles 11:15, Bacchus worship. Ozarks have a lot of Bacchus worship places and rituals to try to get females into being coerced into satyress rituals to also be sealed and be emblazoned with that spirit of Pan as well. And the appetites were very evil of the satyriasis. You could call it Styriasis. This is the maniacal spirit you get involved with the Bacchus and Pan worship. And Pan was also worshipped at Mount Banias in the Bible. And that was these things come from original Atlantean times, the antediluvian period. And they're kind of different from the marine spirits because they're like a amalgamation of sorts. There used to be a restaurant here that was a white tea kettle where some Native Americans got killed and mafia disposal happened on this trail. But anyways, so a form of Pan's mock Zion is one of the things we combated as super soldier kids in the NSA archives and the supernatural files. Pan is always portrayed as playing a flute, but that wasn't the case in the modern hybrid recreated ones. Ban can be translated to Pan, Panias. That's why the city was called Banias. And it lists in the Bible there being a lot of rock badgers there, hyraxes, and the Bible calls them wise because they sought sanctuary in a safe place. And now Mount Hermon was where Yahushua took them on a detour to show them that the gates of hell will not prevail against them, where the fallen angels made their pack, and where the biggest spot for Pan worship was. Now the snow in the base would seep down onto that mountain base, and it's why Yahushua took them there to ask them also who they thought he was, and to claim that territory, because the Luciferian hybrid kings of Atlantis and Pan's minions would still be affecting the children of God way into the future. And it was the stronghold there and in that time. And it was causing the other pantheon of abominations in the woods, the wine libations, the parties that went on in the woods, and the goat worship that went on in the woods. Because this all starts from the spirit of that Baphomet, which was actually a literal beast. Yes, it can be an idol, but it was a literal beast. And this was an ancient beast that had to be chained into the earth, and it had multiple eyes and multiple arms. 9 eyes, in fact, and it was called a time demon. And the reason why some of those things had to be dealt with and fought, why the archangels themselves, is because that type of evil and wickedness has to be contained in the earth and severed from its body, so that not everything happens all at once. And the apocalypse just starts and finishes with the devil's timing, wanting to go before the time always. So he chooses and seeks to try to divide time and time, instead of just letting things happen the way they naturally should, which is where we should be at, in God's will and not out of God's will in the timeline. Because if you get out of God's will and he doesn't correct you right away and bring you back into that alignment, then you're in danger in life. So the difference that I saw in the modern hybridized Pan versus the old one was that the spirit was still as strong. It could, go into the new hybrids of Pan, and it had the nymphomaniac spirit and many other things, because spirits go in groups, and especially when they're in a legion and bring their friends. So Pan's legion was from Lucifer's DNA pool and other genetic mutations, hybrids created from the same gene pool, and then they seal them into that goat spirit head. So what the spirit of Pan is basically it's insanity, nymphomania, malevolence, deceit, craftiness. It just seeks to cause harm, and then it uses, in the hybrid ones, this is what it used the most, was psi attacks, to create murderous destruction and rip something apart. Because any spirit from this legion, from this goat legion, is evil every second, just like the Nephilim were, and their children, and the giants, and the disembodied spirits. They seek to basically rape anything innocent to death, and then to rip that life apart with its claws. And that's my documentation of what Pan and Baphomet spirit is. So, very not cool. So if the Pan spirit manifests in a body, if it gets a body, what happens is that its legs become super strong, and it has black fingernails. It smells, its horns come out, and it's marked with the rank of that Amalekite spirit that is a hunter spirit, and it's what chased the children of Israel and hunted them in the wilderness for many years too. And it's why God said, I want to smote the Amalekites' name and blot it out from history and from under heaven. So my experience with the modern Pan's Labyrinth and the future is where I'm going to go next. So it's an old creature that somehow survived in a wooded area from the past. And that one wasn't fully, I don't know, I guess taken off the earth. So we have these like lingering things in DNA, and these lingering activators that can activate this type of things in our DNA that's hidden and stored in the junk DNA. And certain proteins can activate them too. So my experience with Pan's Labyrinth is this. The original was a much scarier version. The newer one was powerful, yes. It had the same type of brain effects and whatnot. The weird thing with the modern one, the hybrid one, is that it created this brain spiral pattern with brain waves that somehow linked up both halves of its brain and tried to power them together, like as powerful as it could, both sides of the left and right brain hemisphere. It's like it had two brains, is what it felt like. And it tries to like power up both sides of the brain so that the two halves of the brain create this spiraling out effect. And it starts out with like a swirling effect, like the feeling that you have when you're about to faint. So it powers that up, and the thing is that it didn't do a very good job at this, because it's like the thing was like pretty much not semi, but retarded in nature, and it was demented, and its brainwaves patterns were just, it seemed like they were off, or they were not calibrated too well. So when it powered up the spiral swirling effect of the brain, sometimes its eyes would go cross, and it's like it would get just demented or delusional. And then it would push its head forward, much like the Greys do, to try to knock the victim unconscious. But the thing that happened when it did that, and it also has a major spirit of perversion too. So it would say really crazy things while it was trying to power up the spirals in its brain, and why Pan's Labyrinth shows the spirals on its forehead. It went back on this thing, so it had side effects to it. And like I said, its eyes would cross, and what you did then was you used its own brain pattern frequency field to knock it out, so that it was reverberated, and the thing got a taste of its own medicine. They were very OCD too. It's like the Pan spirit was on autopilot. So if it did this thing, if you saw it in the woods, you would just look at it and just want to shoot it. It was just some retarded looking thing in the woods that couldn't even function right. So you didn't even want to give it the time of day. So if it did manage to knock somebody out, it would take its victim into the labyrinth, underworld. Yes, there's keys and there's portals and modern day portal gate tech that you can put anywhere, even in set it up in a light or things that are just very obvious out in nature, as long as you're not perceived, because you have to keep a perception gap to have a lot of that quantum stuff take and stay in effect and be untouched in the timeline. So the Bible also talks about more scriptures, but I'll go into that in detail later. The blue blood, and I said in a different video, it was like an ink from the marine kingdom. And yes, there's steps there. This Pan spirit did have bluish tinge to it, and to its skin. And Maybe that just represents rank or something, or that thing on Pan's Labyrinth that had the weird skin and the one eye and whatnot. We just ended up calling that thing Nook Nook because it would knock on things, and it was also retarded, so we called it Nook Nook because its name started with an N. And that thing represents an ancient creature that comes straight from hell, like a blind, stumbling night stalker type thing. But also the modern created physical version of that was like a drone version that some of the super soldier kids interface with when a prison was laid out for them in consecutive steps into what we called Pan's Labyrinth. Now this thing had like a black lens eye, just one big black lens eye, and the facility that it was controlling also had that one big black lens. And this lens was very sophisticated, high-tech, that interlaced with its brain implants and whatnot, and its black lens would view into any black lenses that were placed around the facility, and then the outside, like a perversion and a dark side of what they just coined looking glass. These things were interface ports, and this thing, the Nook Nook, saw like a cycloptic cyborg would see and had night vision. So to counteract that, you had to do everything and try to get into its brain to have an advantage over everything that it could do in its skill set, including night vision. So its body controlled the facilities, connected to other facilities that were in different states, actually. And this was a network, and it was accessed remotely by this ugly, disgusting Pan's Labyrinth creature that saw through its hands too, which is also a mockery of the crucifixion, and also the supernatural event of people bleeding through their hands. So what happened with the defeating of the Pan spirit is that this goes back to Casbolt too, when he was a teenager. This thing was buried in a certain location, and many cubes were strategically laid in this location, and the cubes also were cemented over and went way down into the earth to also have quantum gate tech embedded into them to access certain realms, what we called Pan's Labyrinth, the facility, and other things in the area that are still classified. But Casbolt went down to this area with me, and he was kind of an asshole brother sometimes. So he would write and tag things all over underneath bridges and places that would really get under my skin. And he's drinking an old bottle that was at this liquor cabinet of this house we were at, a mansion. And where the spirit of the Pan was buried, somehow he almost got possessed by the Pan spirit when he opened this bottle. And I saw, because I could see spirits very easily still, that goat spirit try to come out of the bottle and attach as a spirit into his body. So he had to fight, even after all the Pan stuff was done, the disembodied spirit that came out of the body. And it was pretty scary because, for one, somebody like that who's trained as a super soldier and pretty strong is scary enough if they get triggered or go off the Richter. Not to mention a huge overshadowing spirit of strong goat legs and the horns when you see that manifest as a spirit. Because it's like these spirits are really, really angry when you seal them, when you get rid of them, when they're blocked off from doing what they enjoy doing. So they'll try to just give you one last punch and one cheap shot on their way out. So luckily that didn't work. He didn't get possessed. There's a lot of inside jokes between us still about this. But the sleep paralysis then came after that pan spirit. At one point I actually woke up and felt the outline of like what was lingering or left of that spirit, which was pretty weak, but it was still enough to cause sleep paralysis. And these goat legs that were like pushing down on my legs, trying to hold my legs down so I couldn't move. And then your eyes would roll back in your head and you'd have to fight that attack of the night terror and the sleep paralysis. So these things get into your minds. It's not just the swirly brain wave frequencies and the spirals. That also creates a type of like music and sound to it that you have to block out first of all, because they always attack your mind first. It is the mental manipulation in your dreamscape that you also have to be very discerning about, because this pan spirit, when it attacked me in my sleep, it came up to me like it was my dog, first of all, like an animal, and I knew something was wrong with my dog. They pretend to be something they're not, of course, so when you call that spirit out, you can command it, and it has to show you its true form. And then it came to me as my daughter's voice and saying like, oh, it's just some movie you're watching or something. It'll whisper some lies into your ear, appear something different, and then you recognize it for what it is. And then by that time, it's probably already got a stronghold on your body and your mind, and you're under that spiritual attack. But if you snap out of it fast enough and call upon the Messiah, he will enter right in and take care of that and send that spirit to hell. And you can ask the Lord to send these spirits to the pit, to the void, back to where they belong. And the Lord will do that for you, and he'll fight your battles for you. And he's never lost a battle. He's still fighting every one of our battles, and the victory is in him. So my advice at this point in time is for any of the people who are experiencing what we used to call soul surfing, consciousness interfacing, consciousness linking with seeing through somebody's eyes or running into yourself type situations where you create that link and you know that you've seen it before or experienced it before. It goes far, far beyond deja vu and way beyond remote viewing, the things that we are capable of doing as far as streaming in the timelines, jumping, and consciousness loops and tying up loose ends go. So the goal was to reach the finish line of total recall, which everybody's supposed to be at right now, and to be able to get rid of anything in this timeline that doesn't belong, all the things that don't belong, anything unnecessary, and then to clean yourself up, to work on yourself, and to get off of Satan's frequency directly into the organic timeline that God has prepared for all of us to be at, to do the work that he prepared in advance for us to do in Christ's body. So I've done and I've seen so much of myself and viewing and streaming and things with time and the force of time and traveling and whatnot and the continuum of it, that it really doesn't faze me anymore. But I know for some people it can be like a shock to their system, and they may not be ready for it. It may be like, because you can't just unravel and unpackage somebody and decompress them. It's like decompressing 100 years from some of us all at once. That can cause somebody to commit suicide. That can cause somebody to have a stroke. So what you have to do is just call upon God's tender mercies, because he knows how each one of our minds are created and how to gently unravel each one of us so that we can be functional and optimal in this apocalyptic end times period, because he made our souls, he preserved our souls, and he grafted our spirits into his to be able to endure and see things beyond what he did when he was on the earth. So just recognize his spirit in all things and ask and pray for the release of all the knowns and unknowns, and find your identity in him. Because what happens in old jumps and things that deal with the time continuum and time travel and successful missions and strategies that were used far above what most any humans could ever think of or have experienced, is that there is there's functions in this, and there's parameters, and there's protocols that had to be met. And there is a time wave function that happens every time you make a quantum entanglement with your jump from your old self to future self, where you are now versus whatever point in the timeline you have, or going sideways in time to loop things together. That time wave function has to collapse, and that's why people are experiencing not deja vu, but way more than that, and seeing and linking, shaking hands with a person that may even be you, that's causing that quantum time wave function to collapse, because that cancels out all the unnecessaries, and it's exactly where you're supposed to be at this time. So just pray for more understanding, more levels of revelation, and everything will work together for those who love good and seek to do good, and for those who love God, because your intent and your purpose has to be good. And if you can't carry integrity and honor in the present, and it's just something that maybe you had a little bit of in the past, then you're really of no use. And what good is that going to be if you're called to be a soldier in heaven's army, if you can't even retain that and that character resolve? Because that's what creates an easier growth pattern in the fruits of the Spirit, so that you can be that strong oak, strong pillars of heaven, things that we're called and commissioned to do before the foundations of this world. Where the elect are supposed to be, God will plant them, and they're rooted and grounded, and they'll grow there. And they're gathering in many, many places. So just go where that holy Shekinah spirit wind blows you, and you'll never go astray, because God's wisdom surpasses anything in our minds where we think we need to be. Just do what he says, go where he leads you, speak when he tells you to, listen when you need to, and just live daily by that bread, that manna, and the living water. And the gardener will just take out all the weeds and the roots and the things that don't belong in your whole being, in your life. And he'll make your life beautiful, because he can take anything bad and turn it into his good, for his glory, for his purposes, and for his honor. So I pray that your minds and your imaginations will be sanctified, and that all who are called in the body of the elect would be consecrated, would be redeemed, and would be made holy vessels for the future work that needs to be done. In the name of Yahushua Mashiach, have a blessed, beautiful day.